Tonight on Primetime Politics, Liberal gains. The latest polling numbers are showing a huge swing in voter preference. The Liberals now leading in several surveys, obliterating the 20-point lead Conservatives had just 4 weeks ago. Coming up, polls analyst Éric Grenier will tell us how that could translate in a future election. Also, our political strategists will give us their take on last night's Liberal leadership contest, and Ukrainian MP Rudik on Donald Trump and the challenge now facing Ukraine. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, without a doubt, Donald Trump is having a big impact on political debate in this country. Political leaders now forced to examine trade relationships, defense agreements, and future investments, all thanks to the U.S. president and his ongoing threats and insults directed towards Canada.
When I spoke to, let's call it the Prime Minister rather than the Governor, but when I spoke to him, I said, why are we giving you $200 billion a year? He was unable to answer the question. I said, why are we letting you make millions of cars and send them in? He was unable to answer the question. Justin Trudeau, nice guy. I think he's a very good guy. I call him Governor Trudeau. He should be governor.
And as we note what comes to us from the U.S. White House, we're also seeing some big changes in voting intentions right here at home. Polls analyst Éric Grenier here to talk about that. He is the man behind the Writ. Éric, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So as I said, some big changes when you look at the latest numbers, big gains for the Liberals. Walk us through what we're seeing from the individual polling firms.
Yeah, we've had a series of polls come out just in the last few days, and they're really numbers we haven't seen for several years. We're looking at gaps of between 4 and 3 points, either with the Liberals ahead or the Conservatives ahead. So when you're looking at numbers like this, where the gap between the two parties is this close, we are effectively in a tied situation. And you can also see in those numbers that the NDP has also come down quite a bit, somewhere between 12 and 16% in the polls. So they have taken the brunt of the Liberals' rise there. But these are numbers that are not Mark Carney numbers, or they're not hypothetical leader numbers. They are actually numbers that either ask respondents, would you vote for Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party or just the Liberal Party? So it is actually that the Liberals have made up a lot of these gains without even having that leadership change yet. I do think a lot of it is Canadians assuming that the Mark Carney will probably be the next leader, and that is helping push the Liberals forward. But the amount of change that we've seen in the polls in just the last month and a half, we're talking about nearly 20-point swing. It is just the kind of thing that you rarely see in an election campaign, let alone outside of a writ period.
Yeah, very unusual what we're seeing here. And to your point, again, just with Justin Trudeau resigning, but you talked about the built-in assumption about Mark Carney winning. And what's interesting to me is when you go through your report on the Writ today, when you put Mark Carney as the leader of the Liberal Party and put that into your poll tracker, walk us through what your findings are.
Yeah, there we see that the Liberals could actually win an election with Mark Carney as the leader right now. There's been a series of polls that have tested Mark Carney as leader of the Liberal Party. It boosts the Liberals significantly, usually again to a point where they're tied with the Conservatives, but at the regional level it has some different numbers. And overall, we'd get somewhere around 169 seats for the Liberals. You would need 172 for a majority government. So they would be in a position to potentially win not only an election, but a majority government. And the Conservatives would make some gains, because we have to point out that these numbers are still better for the Conservatives than they were in the last election. But you saw the NDP down to just 3 seats. One of the things that is just remarkable with the polls that we've seen over the last few weeks is that, yes, the Conservatives have come down, but they're going down to a level that is still higher than they had in either of the last 3 elections. But the NDP, their vote is almost being cut in half, and that could see their caucus be reduced to just a handful of seats, if that. That has been really one of the big shifts, I think, and one of the reasons why when the Liberals have to go back to the House, I'm not sure if it would be a request for the NDP to prop up the Liberals, but maybe a request from the NDP for them to be propped up by the Liberals.
Yeah, well, when you look at that poll tracker, crunching it to maybe 3%, let's take one more look at those numbers, though, because what is jaw-dropping for me is not only the seat count, the probability of seat count that you have there, but the odds of winning most seats, 72% for the Liberals. That is something that we would not have been talking about just 4 weeks ago.
No, it was less than 1% chance that the Liberals would win the most seats. Now, of course, these are hypothetical polls with Mark Carney as the leader. He's not the leader yet. And when he does become leader, we'll see some numbers that'll maybe shift around. But it just shows how much has changed. And that when the Liberals are getting into a place where they are tied with the Conservatives, that is enough for them to win an election. As we saw in the last two elections, they were behind the Conservatives by about a point and a half in terms of the popular vote. Still won more than 40 seats than the Conservatives. If they end up in a tie or narrowly ahead of the Conservatives, the Liberals can win a majority government without much more support than the other party. This is something that the Conservatives don't have. They probably need to be up 8-9 points to secure a majority government. So the shifts in the polls could have a huge impact on the next election. Is it going to hold? That is, of course, the open question. This kind of movement, when it is so dramatic and upends everything we've seen for the last really year and a half, it makes me think that the foundation for it is not very solid. If it can swing this quickly with Mark Carney as leader, it can swing back just as fast. Yeah, and in fact, I wonder, because Liberals need Quebec to build government, I wonder about Mark Carney's performance in the French debate of earlier this week, whether or not that's going to have an impact on those numbers in the polls to come. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other parties that does take a hit when you put Mark Carney into those polls is the Bloc Québécois. Doesn't really make that much sense when you think about, as you mentioned, Mark Carney's French language skills, but it does seem to be hurting the Bloc. We have seen several polls in Quebec as well that support for sovereignty has gone down over the last little while. It seems likely that this could be related to the threats from Donald Trump, that it is putting that issue aside and making it more about unity, getting behind the flag. But what's happening in Quebec is also just remarkable. All of these numbers are just things I don't think we would have expected 6 weeks ago. Well, luckily we have Éric Grenier to walk us through that. Éric, thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, thanks. Well, let's talk about those debates now, because the second of two took place last night, again in Montreal, this time around in English. CPAC's Andrew Thomson was there. He's here to talk about some of the highlights, maybe the lowlights. Andrew, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Michael.
So, as we said off top, Donald Trump is forcing this country to examine a number of agreements, security arrangements made. So not surprisingly, Donald Trump does figure into last night's debate. Tell us about what you heard.
Well, in fact, the U.S. president was dominating the first 40 minutes, the candidates promising a tough response to potential tariffs and threats to Canadian sovereignty, and talking about why they're the right leader to be dealing with Trump. Here's some of what we heard on that question.
Part of the way to deal with this situation is to do what we should have been doing and what we need to do as a country, which is to build a strong economy.
Trump represents the biggest threat our country has seen since the Second World War. I have recognized that from the outset. I've built my campaign on a plan to answer that threat.
We are a proud, sovereign country, and as Canadians, we have so much to offer, but also the Americans depend on us. And you can't bring a calculator to a knife fight. You have to fight very strongly and with the right tools.
Mr. Trump is a bully, and you do not give 1 inch to a bully. In that case, we cannot be learning this on the job. That's where I come in.
And those are just some of the sampling of the answers we got to the question as to how they would deal with Donald Trump. Although he, as you said, Andrew, he figured quite largely in last night's debate. One name, one person who did not figure largely until the end is Justin Trudeau, because at the end there was a very direct question about the outgoing Prime Minister. Tell us about that.
Right. The candidates were asked, how would you differentiate yourself from Mr. Trudeau? Now, this was a chance for the candidates to put some room between themselves and the man they want to replace. And here we heard more about leadership style. Let's have a look.
I'm much more hands-on, much more of a hands-on person, hands-on manager. I focus on results and getting things done.
For me, this campaign has been a personal liberation, and I am my own person, and it is great. I personally do not believe in a style of leadership, which is a one-man band.
Where I will differentiate myself greatly is that I'll be focused much more on the economy. I'll be focused on creating wealth. I'll be focused on getting more money into Canadians' pockets. That's what I'm good at.
Where I see a big difference is in making sure that we stay and I stay connected to the grassroots. And this is something that as Liberals, I want to talk to you specifically about. We need to hear your voices. We need to hear your ideas.
And Michael, the leadership is now in the hands of those grassroots Liberals who are eligible to vote. They have until next Sunday.
Okay, Andrew, thank you for that. Our Andrew Thomson. Well, let's continue the conversation now with Susan Smith, former Liberal strategist, now principal and co-founder of Blue Sky Strategy Group. Jordan Paquet, a former Conservative strategist, also now vice president with the same company. And George Soule, former director of communications for the NDP, currently managing a local campaign in the Ontario election. Voting day tomorrow, right, George? Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Hi, Michael. So listen, I'm going to start out there with the last question I had with Andrew, and really the last question of last night's debate. The moderator, Hannah Thibodeau, asking the four hopefuls how they would distinguish themselves from the Prime Minister. And you had Mark Carney say that he would focus more on the economy, would consult more. Chrystia Freeland saying that she was now her own person, although she did try to avoid the question to begin with. Karina Gould said she would listen more to the grassroots. Mr. Bayless saying he would focus more on economic growth. Is that enough to distinguish themselves, given the fact that Justin Trudeau's numbers are so unpopular right now with Canadians, Susan?
I don't actually think that's going to be the ballot question anymore. I think the ballot question is going to be who's best to stand up to Trump, and that's why you've seen the Liberal numbers change so much. I think Canadians are kind of over Trudeau. They were mad at him. And he was around for a long time. It inevitably happens in Canadian politics, but he stepped aside. And because he's out of the equation and there are other contenders, most notably Mr. Carney, we're seeing a near evenness in the polls right now. So I think the ballot question will not, in fact, be why are you not Justin Trudeau? It will be who is best to stand up to Donald Trump and who is best to manage the Canadian economy in the coming turmoil that we know we're going to face living next door to a Trump administration.
Okay, Jordan, what do you say to that? Because I've heard Conservatives say time and again, well, this person was in the cabinet, this person was in the cabinet, this person advised. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and Mark Carney was the top economic advisor for Justin Trudeau over the last 5 years. So I know the Liberals are going to want to try and run as far as they can from Justin Trudeau and his record, but they were right there in the center of it over the last 9 years. And that's what the Conservatives are going to do over the next couple months as we lead into a general election, is to really make that stick. These individuals, they say they want to go and stand up to Donald Trump. They couldn't even stand up to Justin Trudeau over the last couple of years if they're going to talk about those policies that they're trying to run from now. It's been Pierre Poilievre that's been putting those new ideas in the window for the last couple of years, and now they're just trying to catch up right now. No, the last 2 years. No, I mean he's been talking about housing strategies, breaking down interprovincial trade barriers,
no, he hasn't.
getting rid
He's
of
been talking about exit tax. He's had one T-shirt.
Yeah, and he had a big policy platform that he rolled out a couple of weeks ago as well.
So 10
and now that
minutes
they're trying to catch up. No, this has been going on for 2 years.
Okay, George, what do you say? Did they distinguish themselves enough from what is right now an unpopular Prime Minister?
Well, I think the answer is actually kind of no, they didn't, but it also doesn't matter. So, I think to both the points that my colleagues were bringing up, I think that it's, they're indistinguishable from Justin Trudeau as far as the connection they have over the last number of years. But I actually agree with Susan that won't be the ballot question. And it's enough that it's not Justin Trudeau not that he's on the ballot, but it's not on the side of the plane, I think will be a big change. And I think what's going to be the question is going to be, who is best going to be able to get us through this stuff. If it's who can argue with Donald Trump, that's one thing. But I think it's also, as I've said before, who's actually going to support people, when the tariffs do come, because we know no matter what we negotiate, they're coming anyway. So I think that's the opportunity for the NDP. I think, Mark Carney is going to get hit hard by the Conservatives. I think, people should remember that Mark Carney also was handpicked as an advisor from Stephen Harper. So, is that guy somebody who understands the lives we've led? I don't think so. And I think that Pierre Poilievre's also struggled with that. So I think we'll see how that goes forward. But I don't think that the question is going to be how close were you to Justin Trudeau. Okay,
you say Mark Carney is going to get hammered hard, and Carney still is the perceived front runner in this race. We'll know for certain in a couple of weeks' time. But here you have a fairly easy debate amongst the four, fairly collegial debate amongst the four. And Mark Carney, of the four, is the only one that has never ran in a campaign, never sat in the House of Commons. Has he been vetted enough? Has he proven that he can actually take in, the thrust and parry of what political debate is? And this campaign is expected to be a nasty one.
So a couple things. Mark Carney has been the governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. He's sat and done press conferences about the economy. He's participated in global forums. He has not been in the House of Commons. That's correct. But Canadians complain a lot about what goes on in the House of Commons. If I was Mark Carney's team, and I would say to him that his opening statement should be in the debate once he wins and he's up against Mr. Poilievre, would say, "Hi, I'm Mark Carney. I was born in the Northwest Territories. I grew up in Edmonton. I'm an economist. I'm not a career politician. And for better or for worse, I don't speak in slogans, but I understand how the economy works. I understand how to put a government together. I understand how to run a government, and I can stand up to Mr. Trump. And I don't spend my time thinking about a soundbite and how to shout over people in the House of Commons. I think that's going to be quite refreshing for people. I think he might need to remind a few people that that's not who he is and that's not how he rolls. But if we've been listening to Canadians for a long time, they think question period and the shenanigans that goes on in there is like kindergarten, worse than kindergarten, and we need some decorum, and we certainly we need to go toe-to-toe with Trump on tariffs, but we don't need to go toe-to-toe with Trump on slogans and grandstanding. We need smart economic management, and I think that's what Carney will put forward for Canadians to choose.
Okay, nice alliteration. Toe-to-toe with Trump. So what do you think, Jordan, whether or not Mark Carney has proven himself capable enough or has been tested enough for the role that it looks like he's going to inherit?
So, and in your preamble too, Michael, you said, has he been vetted enough? And to me, that's going to be part of his Achilles heel going forward if he's not able to answer some of these questions about asset disclosure, about what his role was at Brookfield in taking that company down to the U.S. and putting it in the headquarters down there. He gave an answer last night, fine, but then Conservatives were out pressing on it today, showing a letter where he, as chair of the board, said this decision is unanimous from there. He's going to have to do these asset disclosures going forward. He said it would be in his interest to do it quickly so that there won't be these questions hanging over him going forward.
He did say last night in the debate that he's already signed the paperwork for his security clearance. Mr. Poilievre's had trouble. Well, that's pretty important, I think, for the national security
as well. So I mean,
but he won't
also
take the briefing. He won't do the clearance.
Well, he doesn't need to get a PCO briefing to
but to the vetting process and be able to fight the fight.
Something that will stick with Canadians. And Carney, yes, they know who he is as a name, but they don't know who he actually is as a person, what he did at different companies and whatnot. And it's not to say there's anything nefarious there, but the longer he refuses to answer and actually put his assets out there on the table for Canadians to see, to make sure he's completely above board in any conflict of interest laws, which this previous Liberal government has had issues with, that's going to be a question out there, and it could be his Achilles heel.
George, what do you think? Because I think a political party would want to have the belief that their leader is well tested and can carry the fight. Has Mark Carney proven that he can do that?
Well, it is sort of a surreal reality of our democracy that somebody who has never run in an election at all could become our prime minister. So I think that in itself is going to be an interesting thing for Canadians to recognize and learn about. As far as being tested, he hasn't really. I think it's interesting, though, for the Conservatives to be bringing up his past because, I don't think Pierre Poilievre wants to talk too much about his either. His entire life spent in Parliament and his voting record against workers, against choice, against equal marriage, on and on and on. These are things that Pierre Poilievre is trying to deny about his past. So that's going to be a challenge for him, I think, as he tries to dig in the history books. And again, I think it's just going to come down to how people feel. More and more politics is about feeling and feeling connected to someone. I'm not sure, and with due respect to Susan, I'm not sure. Don't worry, I'm an economist is the best message to connect with folks at home. But I do think that's going to be an interesting path for both the Conservatives as they try to attack, but also for Carney to try to appear to be like the rest of us.
It wasn't, don't worry, I'm an economist. It was, I'm not a snappy speaker because I'm an economist.
Clarification from Susan Smith.
Yes. Okay. With all due respect to all the economists, speaking English when you're an economist is tough. Clear, comprehensible stuff. I actually think Mark Carney does a good job of translating the complex economic stuff two kitchen table issues for Canadians, but he doesn't do slogans like Paquet does.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to say, I'm a journalist. We ran out of time. Susan, Jordan, George, thank you for that. Donald Trump says the Ukrainian president will make his way to the White House on Friday, presumably to finalize a deal announced last night that will give the United States access to Ukraine's critical minerals. But it's still unknown how solid that deal is, since Volodymyr Zelensky is looking for a security guarantee from the United States, protecting Ukraine from any future Russian aggression. But Donald Trump is not giving any of those assurances, at least not yet, saying any security guarantee has to come from Europe.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well. And as you know, we'll be making we'll be really partnering with Ukraine in terms of rare earth.
Well, for some reaction to all this, we're now joined by Rudik. She has been a member of the Ukrainian parliament since 2019. Ms. Rudik, thank you for joining us this evening.
Hello, Michael, and thank you so much for having me.
Listen, I need to begin with the critical mineral deal that President Zelensky announced last night. Details still to be sorted through, and that also includes security guarantees for Ukraine, rather. But earlier today, we heard from President Trump. He says that any security guarantee would be up to Europe more than the United States. What's your reaction to that?
Well, Michael, the details of the deal are unclear as of right now. We have seen only the framework saying that more details are to come. But the general structure is not quite clear for me, that the United States are getting the rare minerals profits, but Europe is responsible for the security, and it doesn't just add up. The thing that we have seen is that President Trump is operating under illusion that Putin wants peace, but we didn't see any confirmation to that from our side. So Russia keeps attacking us every day and night. So right now we are in this position that we have more unknowns than actually knowledge-based facts. This is why I think we should wait a little bit, because the details of all of this and how it will all come together, it just doesn't seem right to me.
It doesn't seem right to you, and you're right, we need to wait for details here. But if there is no security guarantee from the United States, is it wise for Ukraine to be negotiating access to critical minerals in your country?
I absolutely agree with you. For any kind of deal, for any kind of support, the baseline is the security guarantees. Like, what are we getting if we give up our rare minerals or the proceeds on them? We also need to understand, because it is unclear from the framework, if this is a deal about the past or it is a deal about the future. Because Donald Trump made statements a couple of times regarding that Ukraine needs to pay back for what Biden administration was sending here. Now we hear that perhaps this is for the future support of the United States. But however, in any case, it is again not clear what direction this will go. I will tell you that for us, the main and key item of any deal is, how do we make sure that Russia would not attack us again? And it has not been clear up to this point of how would anyone or any organization in the world ensure the security for Ukraine. So the deal may be good, may be bad, but it's definitely not solving the issue that we currently have. Russia constantly attacking us, and Ukraine not being able to galvanize this support to make a final fight back.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, the fighting has not stopped. I'm going to get to Russia in a moment, but whenever this war ends, going back to critical minerals here, Ukraine is going to need money to rebuild. This war has been devastating for your country. Are you worried that giving the U.S. mineral rights to this rare earth will rob Ukraine of the financial resources it will need to rebuild?
It's a difficult question. Of course, our surviving is our top priority, and we will do whatever it takes for our survival and for bringing just peace to our territories. However, of course, it will be unfair to, as President Zelensky said, to do a deal that 10 generations of Ukrainians will have to pay off for. And I'm very disturbed by the fact that President Trump is looking at Ukraine's rare minerals rather than looking at Russia's frozen assets that are of 300 billion that are being stored in Belgium Euroclear depository. And it's much easier, faster, and clean way of getting money if he really needs them. And it's a fair and just way of doing that because the aggressor is paying for everything. Taking money and investing in Ukraine's rare mineral is a good question because we honestly cannot guarantee the success of this operation. It will require significant investment and it will require really peace and long term to have the return on these investments, if any. We do not know as of right now. There has not been a deep investigation and research done on Ukraine's rare mineral for many years right now.
Mm-hmm. So, and to your point, rather than looking to the rare minerals as a way of payback to the U.S., there have been Russian assets seized because of this illegal invasion, the result of sanctions against Russia these many years. You know, before we're done here, we did earlier this week see the Prime Minister, along with European leaders, make a show of solidarity in Kyiv. With that in mind, you talk about the need to secure Ukraine's future, the concern about Russian aggression now and in future as well. So what do you need from countries like Canada and countries of the EU?
We need for all the countries of the democracies to accept the responsibility for the security, even if the position of the United States will be hectic as it is right now. We understand that Russia will not go away, and Russia and its allies, China, North Korea, and Iran, will continue building on their industrial and military complex, continue producing drones and weapons and supplies, no matter what happens in Ukraine. Even if there is a peace deal, we do not believe that Russia will stop arming itself together with its allies. So right now we need democratic countries to take security seriously, to go ahead with the decisions that we were expecting for a long time, ramping up the GDP that is going to security according to NATO agreements, but going more, making the straightforward and rapid decisions in terms of the trainings, increasing military capacity inside those countries. Of course, we are waiting for a significant decision on funds that will go to Ukraine from Europe and the amount of weapons and supplies that Europe will start producing. Because one of the issues with the support of the United States is, of course, funds. But the second is that the United States is sole producer of many air defense systems and many types of weapons that we are right now using. So for Europe to effectively defend itself, no matter who is sitting in the White House, it needs to be able to do so. And that will take investing in its own security.
Kira Rudik, thank you for this. Appreciate the insight and always appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and glory to Ukraine.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Wednesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.